A lonely widow helped a beggar. The simple act of kindness seemed unremarkable to anyone passing by on that bitter December morning, but it would unravel a decade of heartache neither could have imagined. Martha Caldwell hadn't realized how the fragile walls she'd built around her grief could collapse with a single extended hand. The winter had settled into her bones, much like the emptiness had settled into her home. 15 years a widow, and the silence still found new ways to echo through the rooms where laughter once lived. Today marked the anniversary of her husband Robert's passing, but even that familiar pain felt hollow compared to the ache that truly defined her. The son she'd lost not to death, but to words that could never be unsaid. Martha pulled her coat tighter against the biting wind as she made her way down Maple Street toward Henderson's bakery. The ritual of buying a single cinnamon roll on this day had become her private memorial. Robert had always said Irene Henderson's cinnamon rolls could make angels weep with joy. Martha smiled faintly at the memory, her breath visible in the morning air. The holiday decorations adorning the storefronts along Main Street felt like they belonged to another world, one with family dinners and wrapped presents waiting under trees. Martha's small apartment would remain undecorated this year, as it had for many years now. What was the point of hanging lights when there was no one to see them? She was so lost in thought that she nearly missed him, the huddled figure in the recessed doorway of the shuttered hardware store. Something about the way his shoulders curved inward, as if trying to contain some immense weight, made her slow her steps. His face was mostly hidden beneath a frayed wool cap pulled low, a thick beard obscuring what little of his features remained visible. The cardboard sign beside him was smudged from moisture, but the words, "Anything helps," were still legible. Martha had seen homeless people before, of course. The small town of Millfield had its share of hardship like anywhere else. Usually she would offer a small nod of acknowledgement, perhaps drop $1 or $2 if she had cash, and continue on her way. But today, perhaps because grief had made her raw, or perhaps because the universe sometimes orchestrates moments of fateful collision, she stopped. "Would you like a hot cup of coffee?" The words left her mouth before she'd fully formed the thought. "I'm heading to the bakery just up the block." The man's head lifted slowly. His eyes, startlingly blue against the weathered tan of his skin, widened slightly at being addressed directly. Martha felt a peculiar twist in her chest. Something about those eyes triggered a memory she couldn't quite place. That would be very kind," he said, his voice raspy as if unaccustomed to use. He didn't quite meet her gaze. "I'll be right back then," Martha said, suddenly feeling awkward. What was she doing? Robert would have approved, though. He always said kindness cost nothing but meant everything. Inside Henderson's, the warmth and scent of cinnamon embraced her like an old friend. Irene, her silver hair perfectly coiled as always, smiled from behind the counter. "The usual, Martha?" she asked, already reaching for a cinnamon roll. "Yes, please." "And 2 large coffees to go." Irene's eyebrows lifted slightly. "2?" Martha felt a flush creep up her neck. "There's a man outside. He looks like he could use something warm." "Good for you," Irene said softly, adding an extra pastry to the bag. "On the house. It's cold out there." When Martha returned to the doorway, she half expected the man to be gone, but he remained, hands tucked into the sleeves of his threadbare coat for warmth. She handed him a coffee and, after a moment's hesitation, the extra pastry. "I thought you might be hungry too," she explained. His fingers, red from cold, trembled slightly as they brushed against hers in the exchange. "Thank you, ma'am. You didn't have to do this." "It's Martha," she said, surprising herself again. Why was she giving her name to a stranger? "And it's nothing, really." The man hesitated before responding. "I'm Jack." Something about the pause made Martha wonder if that was truly his name, but it wasn't her place to question. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the steam from their coffee cups mingling in the cold air between them. "Would you like to sit?" Martha nodded toward a nearby bench, another impulse she couldn't explain. Jack looked as surprised by the invitation as she felt offering it. "You don't have to keep me company." "I know," Martha said. "But it's Robert's anniversary, my husband. He passed 15 years ago today. I don't much feel like being alone with my thoughts right now." Jack's expression shifted, something like pain flashing across his features before disappearing behind careful neutrality. "I'm sorry for your loss." They settled on the bench, a respectful distance between them. Martha sipped her coffee, watching the occasional car pass by. The town was quiet this early. "Were you married long?" Jack asked, his voice gentler now. 26 years, Martha replied. High school sweethearts. Everyone said it wouldn't last. She smiled faintly. We proved them wrong until cancer had the final say. Jack nodded, taking a careful bite of his pastry. Martha noticed how he ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were precious. "Do you have family?" Jack asked, then immediately looked as if he regretted the question. Martha's smile faded. The winter air suddenly felt sharper in her lungs. "A daughter in Seattle. We talk sometimes. And ... Her voice trailed off as the familiar pain resurfaced. "A son. But we haven't spoken in nearly 10 years. She hadn't meant to share that. Strangers on a bench weren't supposed to exchange life tragedies over coffee, yet something about Jack's silence felt inviting, like he was offering a space where her words could simply exist without judgment. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "Family can be complicated." The simplicity of his response, the careful way he avoided platitudes, made Martha look at him more closely. His eyes were fixed on the pastry in his hands, but there was an intensity to his stillness that suggested he was feeling far more than he showed. "Yes," she agreed. "Very complicated." They finished their coffee in silence, but it had shifted from awkward to something almost companionable. When Martha stood to leave, she found herself reluctant to end the encounter. "The community center on Pine Street serves hot lunches," she said, gathering her purse. In case you're still around later." Jack nodded. "Thank you, Martha. For everything." She walked away with the strange feeling that something significant had just occurred, though she couldn't have explained what or why. The encounter had momentarily lifted the heaviness of the day, giving her something else to focus on besides her grief. Over the next week, Martha found herself looking for Jack whenever she walked downtown. She told herself it was simply concern for a person in need during winter, but the truth was, their brief conversation had been the most genuine human connection she'd experienced in months. On Thursday, she spotted him again, this time sitting on a bench in the small park near the library. Without overthinking it, she changed course and approached him. "Hello again," she said. Jack looked up, surprise evident on his face before a hesitant smile appeared. "Martha, good to see you. Are you managing all right? With the cold, I mean." "The shelter on Wilson has been letting people stay during the day when temperatures drop below freezing," he explained. "I get by?" Martha nodded, then gestured to the bench. "May I?" When he nodded, she sat beside him, noticing he looked somewhat cleaner than before, though his clothes were still worn and mismatched. "I was heading to the diner for lunch," she said, the idea forming as she spoke. "Would you like to join me?" "My treat." Jack's expression cycled through surprise, suspicion, and something that looked almost like fear before settling into cautious gratitude. "Why are you being so kind to me?" The directness of his question caught Martha off guard. I'm not sure," she admitted. "Maybe because someone was kind to me when I needed it most." She thought of her neighbor Gladys, who had brought food every day for weeks after Robert died, sitting with her through the worst of her grief. Or maybe I'm just tired of eating alone. The honesty of her answer seemed to resonate with him. Jack nodded slowly. "I'd be grateful for the company." At Lou's diner, the waitress gave Jack a suspicious look, until Martha smiled reassuringly. "He's with me, Doris." They settled into a booth by the window. Jack kept his cap on but removed his outer layer, revealing a faded flannel shirt beneath. His hands, Martha noticed, bore the calluses of someone who had known physical labor. "Order whatever you'd like," she told him. "Lou's makes a wonderful meatloaf on Thursdays." Jack studied the menu with careful attention. "It's been a while since I've eaten in a place like this," he admitted quietly. When Doris returned, Jack ordered the meatloaf special, and Martha chose her usual grilled cheese and tomato soup. As Doris walked away, Martha found herself wondering about the man across from her. "Where are you from originally, Jack? If you don't mind my asking?" He tensed slightly, his fingers tightening around his water glass. "All over, really. Never stayed in one place too long." He paused, then added, "But I grew up in a small town, not unlike this one." "And what brings you to Millfield?" Martha asked, keeping her tone conversational. Jack's eyes met hers briefly before looking out the window. "Trying to make peace with some things from my past." The answer was vague yet heavy with meaning. Martha recognized the boundaries being drawn and respected them. "Well, I hope you find what you're looking for." Their food arrived, and Jack's expression when he took the first bite of meatloaf was one of such genuine pleasure that Martha couldn't help but smile. They ate in comfortable silence for a while before Jack spoke again. "You mentioned a son," he said carefully. "The one you don't speak to anymore." Martha's spoon clinked against her bowl as her hand faltered. Few people in town brought up Daniel anymore, knowing it was a painful subject. Yes, Daniel. Jack seemed to register her discomfort. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked. No, it's all right, Martha said, surprising herself again. Daniel is my youngest. He was always headstrong, even as a child, so much like his father. She smiled sadly. After Robert died, Daniel started acting out. I tried to understand, but I was drowning in my own grief. Jack watched her intently, his food momentarily forgotten. He dropped out of college his sophomore year, said he wanted to experience real life instead of wasting time in classrooms. Martha shook her head. We argued terribly. I said things I regret. So did he. He left that night with just a backpack, and I've only heard from him twice since then. A postcard from California the first year, and a short call 3 years later. What did he say? During the call? Jack's voice had a strange quality to it. Martha stared into her soup. He said he was okay but needed more time. I begged him to come home, but he said he couldn't yet. That was 7 years ago. She blinked rapidly, embarrassed to find tears threatening. His birthday was last month. He turned 32. Jack looked down at his plate, his shoulders tense. I'm sure he thinks of you, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Even if he can't, even if he doesn't know how to reach out. Something about his intensity made Martha study him more carefully. Do you have family somewhere wondering about you, Jack? He didn't answer immediately, pushing a piece of meatloaf around his plate. I haven't been fair to the people who care about me, he said finally. I've made mistakes I don't know how to fix. The vulnerability in his admission touched something in Martha. In my experience, most mistakes can be forgiven if we're brave enough to ask. Jack's smile was sad. Some mistakes leave deeper scars than others. They finished their meal talking about safer topics: the unseasonably cold weather, the upcoming holiday festival in the town square, a book Martha had recently read. When the bill came, Jack thanked her with such genuine gratitude that Martha felt almost embarrassed. Would it be all right if I did this again sometime? She asked as they stood outside the diner. Maybe next week? Jack hesitated, conflict evident in his expression. You don't have to take care of me, Martha. I'm not, she assured him. I'm enjoying your company. There aren't many people in this town who will have a real conversation anymore. Most just offer pity disguised as pleasantries. Something like understanding flashed in his eyes. Tuesday? Same time? Martha nodded, feeling oddly lighter than she had in months. Tuesday. Their lunch meetings became a weekly occurrence. Each Tuesday, Martha would meet Jack at the diner, and they would share a meal and pieces of their lives. Jack remained guarded about his past, but gradually revealed small details. He had once worked construction. He enjoyed reading history books. He had traveled through most of the western states. Martha found herself looking forward to their conversations. Jack was thoughtful and surprisingly well-spoken. He asked questions about her life and genuinely listened to her answers. She told him about her years teaching elementary school, about Robert's carpentry business, about her daughter Claire's successful career as an architect. She noticed subtle changes in Jack as the weeks passed. His beard became neater, his clothes cleaner though still worn. His voice grew stronger, less hesitant. Sometimes she would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, something between longing and fear. As Christmas approached, Martha found herself inviting Jack to accompany her to the town's holiday festival. To her surprise, he accepted. The town square was transformed with thousands of twinkling lights. Vendors sold hot chocolate and roasted chestnuts, while local choirs performed carols beside the enormous community Christmas tree. Martha felt strangely nervous walking beside Jack, who had made an obvious effort with his appearance, his beard trimmed close and wearing a clean though dated sweater she suspected came from the shelter's donation box. "This is beautiful," Jack said, looking up at the lights strung between the lampposts. "The town always did Christmas right." Martha glanced at him. "Always? Have you been to Millfield before?" Jack tensed, then forced a casual shrug. "Places like this. Small towns, I mean." She let it go, but filed away the slip. There was something familiar about Jack that had been nagging at her since their first meeting, something she couldn't quite place but felt important. They walked through the festival, stopping to listen to the high school choir and to admire the ice sculptures local artists had created. Martha bought them each a cup of hot chocolate, and they found a bench near the gazebo to sit and watch the festivities. "Thank you for inviting me," Jack said quietly. "It's been a long time since I've done anything like this." "I'm glad you came," Martha replied. I usually avoid the festival. Too many memories. Jack nodded in understanding. With Robert? With Robert, she confirmed. And Daniel. He loved Christmas, all the lights and music. She smiled at the memory. When he was 9, he insisted on making ornaments for everyone in the family. Spent weeks working on them in secret. They were these little clay figures, terribly misshapen but painted with such care. Do you still have them? Jack asked, his voice tight. Yes, Martha said, surprised by the question. I hang Daniel's angel on my little tree every year. It's the only decoration I still put up. Jack was silent for a long moment, staring into his hot chocolate. You must miss him very much. Every day, Martha admitted. Claire tries to fill the gap when she visits, but there's always an empty space at the table. I've accepted that he may never come home, but I'll never stop hoping. Jack's hand trembled slightly as he set his cup down. What would you say to him? If he walked up right now? Martha considered the question, watching a young family pass by, their small children pointing excitedly at the lights. I'd tell him I love him, that I never stopped loving him, that whatever happened between us doesn't matter anymore. Her voice wavered. I'd tell him I'm sorry for not understanding what he needed when he was hurting. Jack swallowed hard, his eyes suspiciously bright in the glow of the Christmas lights. He probably needs to apologize too. Perhaps, Martha agreed. But that's the thing about being a parent. You love without conditions. Daniel could walk up to me after 10 years of silence, and my first instinct would still be to check if he's eating enough. Jack gave a choked laugh that sounded dangerously close to a sob. You haven't changed at all. Martha froze, the words echoing in her mind. The familiarity that had been haunting her suddenly crystallized. Those blue eyes, the shape of his jaw now visible beneath the trimmed beard, the particular way his left eyebrow lifted when he was listening intently. Daniel? The name escaped as barely a whisper. Jack, Daniel, closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping as if in surrender. When he opened them again, they were filled with tears. Hi, Mom. The world around Martha seemed to blur, the festival lights merging into streaks of color as her eyes filled. Her hands began to tremble violently, her cup of hot chocolate falling forgotten to the ground. Daniel? She repeated, her voice breaking. Is it really you? He nodded, unable to speak. Martha's hand reached out tentatively, hovering just above his cheek as if afraid he might vanish at her touch. Why? She finally managed, the single word carrying the weight of 10 years of questions. Daniel took a shuddering breath. I came back to see you. But I was afraid you wouldn't want to see me after everything. I thought if I could just talk to you first, maybe understand if you still... He couldn't finish. If I still loved you? Martha's voice was incredulous. Oh, Daniel, I never stopped. Not for a single day. I've made so many mistakes, Mom, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't know how to face you. I thought it would be easier to see you this way first, to know if there was any chance you could forgive me. Martha's hand finally made contact with his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath her fingertips. The sensation broke something inside her, the dam she had built around her hope, and she began to cry in earnest. All this time, she said between sobs, all these weeks you were my son. Around them, festival-goers continued their celebrations, unaware of the earthquake happening on the small bench by the gazebo. Martha barely noticed when someone paused to ask if she was all right. Daniel assured them she was fine. When she could speak again, Martha asked, Where have you been all these years? What happened to you? Daniel looked down at his hands. California at first, like the postcard said. Then Oregon, Washington, Idaho. I worked construction mostly, sometimes restaurants. I was angry for a long time. At Dad for dying, at you for not understanding, at myself most of all. Why didn't you call again? After that one time? Shame, he admitted. The longer I stayed away, the harder it became to imagine coming back. And then I started drinking too much. Lost some years to that before I got help. He gestured vaguely at himself. I got sober 2 years ago. My sponsor encouraged me to make amends, but I was too afraid to just show up on your doorstep. So you came to town as a homeless man? Martha was trying to process everything. I was going to watch you from a distance first, just to see if you seemed happy, I guess. If your life was better without me in it. He gave a self-deprecating smile. I didn't plan on you offering me coffee that first day. And you kept the charade going all these weeks? Even as we got to know each other again? Daniel nodded, looking ashamed. Each time we met, I told myself I would tell you the truth. But I was a coward. It was easier to be Jack, to have no history, no expectations. And I was afraid once you knew, you might not want anything to do with me. Martha's mind was reeling, trying to reconcile the stranger she'd befriended with the son she'd lost. Looking at him now, she could see Daniel so clearly, in the way he gestured when he spoke, in the furrow between his brows when he was troubled, in the blue eyes that were so like Robert's. "Come home with me," she said suddenly. "Please. We have so much to talk about and I can't do it here." Daniel hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," Martha said firmly. "My son has come back to me. Everything else can wait." The walk to Martha's apartment was quiet, both of them overwhelmed by the enormity of what had happened. Martha kept glancing at Daniel as if afraid he might disappear. He walked beside her with his hands deep in his pockets, his shoulders hunched against more than just the cold. Martha's apartment was small but neat, with bookshelves lining one wall and a few carefully chosen photographs on another. Daniel stood just inside the door, his eyes moving over everything, taking in the evidence of his mother's life without him. His gaze stopped on a small table where a tiny Christmas tree stood, and there, hanging from one of the branches, was a misshapen clay angel with uneven wings and a crooked halo. "You really kept it," he said softly. "Of course I did." Martha followed his gaze. "I keep all your ornaments in a special box. That one stays out where I can see it." Daniel moved closer to the tree, reaching out to touch the ornament gently with one finger. "I remember making this. Dad helped me roll out the clay. He was so proud of your creativity," Martha said, her voice warm with memory. "He kept the fish you made him on his desk at work. Said it reminded him of taking you fishing at Lake Meredith." Daniel smiled faintly. "I was terrible at fishing, but wonderful at making your father happy," Martha countered. She hesitated, then added, "Would you like some tea? Or I have coffee." "Tea would be nice," Daniel said, still looking around the apartment, cataloging the familiar and the new. In the small kitchen, Martha filled the kettle with trembling hands, her mind spinning with questions and emotions. Her son, her Daniel, was standing in her living room after 10 years of absence. It seemed impossible, yet undeniably real. When she returned with 2 mugs of tea, she found Daniel looking at the photographs on her wall. One showed a younger Martha and Robert with teenage Claire and Daniel between them, all smiling on a beach somewhere. "Claire has a daughter now," Martha said, offering him the mug. "Lily. She's 4 and absolutely brilliant." Daniel accepted the tea, his expression a mixture of surprise and sadness. "I have a niece?" Martha nodded. "Claire tried to find you when she was born. She wanted you to know." "I have so much to make up for," Daniel said quietly. "We have time," Martha assured him, though her heart ached at all the years lost. She gestured to the couch. "Please sit. You don't have to stand like a visitor." They sat at opposite ends of the sofa, the space between them laden with unspoken words. Martha had imagined this moment countless times, her son's return, but now that it was happening, she found herself uncertain where to begin. "I don't understand why you didn't just come to me," she said finally. "Why the disguise? The pretense?" Daniel stared into his tea. "I told myself it was to protect you, to make sure I was stable enough to be in your life again. But honestly, I was protecting myself." He looked up at her, his eyes revealing the pain he'd carried. "I was afraid of what I'd see in your eyes. Disappointment, anger, or worse, indifference." "Indifference?" Martha repeated incredulously. "Daniel, I've spent 10 years wondering if you were alive or dead. There were nights I couldn't sleep because I was imagining you hurt or hungry somewhere. How could you think I'd be indifferent? People adapt. They move on," he said simply. "I thought maybe you'd built a life where the pain of missing me had faded, where my return would be an unwelcome disruption." Martha set her mug down with more force than intended. "Is that what you saw these past weeks? A woman who had moved on from loving her child?" Daniel shook his head, shame evident in his expression. "No. I saw a woman who still sets an extra place at holidays. Who keeps childhood ornaments on her tree? Who talks about her absent son with love, not bitterness?" His voice grew hoarse. "I saw everything I was afraid wasn't there anymore. Then why keep pretending? Why not tell me weeks ago?" "Because I'm a coward," Daniel admitted. "Because each day that passed made the lie bigger and the truth harder to tell. Because..." He paused, struggling. "Because being Jack was easier than being the son who abandoned his mother after his father died. Jack had no history of failure." Martha's anger softened at the self-loathing in his voice. "You never failed me, Daniel. You were grieving. We both were, and we handled it badly. I said terrible things to you." "So did I," Martha acknowledged. We were both drowning in pain, but that doesn't erase the 22 years before that, or change how much I've loved you every day since. Daniel's composure finally broke. He set his mug down and covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Martha moved instinctively toward him, closing the distance between them on the couch and wrapping her arms around him as she had when he was a child awakening from nightmares. "It's all right," she murmured, her own tears falling freely now. "You're home. That's all that matters." They stayed that way for a long time, the years of separation dissolving in shared tears. When Daniel finally straightened, wiping his face with the back of his hand, he looked both younger and older than his 32 years. "I don't know where to go from here," he admitted. "Forward," Martha said simply. Together. "I don't even have a proper place to stay," Daniel said with a weak laugh. "All my things are at the shelter." "You'll stay here?" Martha stated as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "The sofa pulls out. Tomorrow we'll get your things and figure out next steps." Daniel looked around the small apartment. "I can't impose on you like that." "It's not imposing when it's your mother," Martha said firmly. Unless you don't want to stay?" A new fear crept into her voice. "No, I do," Daniel assured her quickly. I need to contribute, to not be a burden." Martha reached for his hand, noticing again the calluses and roughness. "You were never a burden, Daniel. But I understand. We'll figure it out together." She squeezed his hand. "Right now I just need you to be here. To be my son again." Daniel's expression softened. "I never stopped being your son, even when I was pretending to be someone else." Martha stood, suddenly energized. "You must be hungry. Let me make you something to eat." "Mom, you don't have to." "I want to," she interrupted. "I've missed cooking for someone who appreciates it. Claire's always watching her carbs when she visits." Daniel followed her to the kitchen, leaning against the doorframe as she began pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. The familiar domesticity of the moment struck them both. How many times had this exact scene played out years ago, Daniel watching his mother prepare dinner after school? "Can I help?" he offered. Martha smiled, handing him an onion and a knife. "You always were good at chopping." They worked side by side, preparing a simple meal of omelets and toast, the mundane activity somehow profound in its normalcy. Martha kept glancing at Daniel, still adjusting to his presence, to the miracle of having her son in her kitchen again. As they ate at her small table, Martha asked the question that had been hovering since his revelation. "What made you decide to come back now? After all this time?" Daniel considered before answering. "My sponsor in AA, he talks a lot about living amends, about becoming the person who wouldn't have caused the harm in the first place." He set his fork down. "I realized I couldn't become that person while hiding from the biggest mistake of my life. I needed to face it, to face you, and accept whatever came next." "And are you still in recovery?" Martha asked gently. Daniel nodded. 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days. "There's a good group that meets at the community center here. I've been going since I arrived in town." Martha felt a surge of pride. "That takes tremendous courage." "Not as much as facing your mother after 10 years, Daniel said with a small smile. "I'm still working on that courage." After dinner, exhaustion caught up with them both. Emotional fatigue heavier than any physical tiredness. Martha made up the sofa bed with fresh sheets while Daniel used the bathroom to wash up. When he emerged wearing the clean t-shirt she'd given him, one of Robert's that she'd never been able to part with, Martha was struck again by how much he resembled his father. The set of his shoulders, the way he ducked his head slightly when uncertain, it was like seeing Robert's ghost. "Will you be comfortable enough?" she asked, gesturing to the made-up sofa. "It's the most comfortable bed I've had in a long time," Daniel assured her. He hesitated, then added, "Thank you. For everything. For the kindness you showed to Jack. For still having room in your heart for Daniel." Martha stepped forward and embraced him again, breathing in the scent of him, different now than she remembered, but still somehow her son. "My heart never had less room. It just had an empty space waiting for you to fill it again." They said goodnight with the awkwardness of people still learning how to be around each other, yet with the underlying comfort of a bond that had never truly broken. Martha lay awake in her bed for hours, listening to the occasional creak of the sofa as Daniel shifted in his sleep. Part of her feared she would wake to find him gone, that this had been some elaborate dream born of longing. But when dawn finally came, she heard the soft sounds of movement in her kitchen. She found Daniel making coffee, his hair damp from a shower. He'd shaved completely, and without the beard, he looked so much like the son she remembered that it made her breath catch. "Good morning," he said, offering a tentative smile. "I hope I didn't wake you." "You didn't," Martha assured him, drinking in the sight of him in the morning light. "You shaved." Daniel ran a hand self-consciously over his smooth jaw. "I thought it was time to stop hiding." Over breakfast, they began the delicate work of rebuilding their relationship. Daniel shared more about his years away, the good and the bad. He had indeed worked construction in several states, had even taken some community college courses in Oregon. The drinking had started as a way to numb his homesickness and regret, eventually becoming a problem that cost him jobs and relationships. "I hit bottom in Seattle," he explained. "Woke up in a hospital after passing out in freezing weather. Could have died. That's when I finally got help." Martha listened, her heart breaking for his struggles, yet swelling with pride at his resilience. In turn, she told him about her retirement from teaching, about Claire's visits with little Lily, about the quiet life she'd built for herself. "I volunteer at the library 3 days a week," she explained. "It gets me out of the house, gives me something meaningful to do." As the day progressed, they ventured out together to retrieve Daniel's few possessions from the shelter. Martha watched how he interacted with the staff there, with gratitude and respect, and felt another surge of pride. This grown man with his careful courtesy was still her son, changed by experience but not diminished by it. The days that followed took on a rhythm as they adjusted to each other's presence. Daniel insisted on contributing, taking odd jobs around town for cash while applying for more permanent positions. Martha found herself humming as she cooked dinner each night, the simple joy of having someone to care for again filling her with purpose. They had difficult conversations, too, about the argument that had driven them apart, about the years of silence, about forgiveness and responsibility. There were tears and raised voices sometimes, but always, underneath, the solid foundation of love that had never truly crumbled. 2 weeks after Daniel's revelation, Martha called Claire. "I have someone who wants to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion as she handed the phone to Daniel. The siblings' reunion over the phone was tearful and raw. Claire alternated between sobbing with joy and berating Daniel for his absence. They talked for over an hour, with promises of a visit as soon as possible. Christmas arrived with a transformed feeling in Martha's apartment. The tiny tree had been replaced with a larger one, decorated with all the ornaments Martha had kept stored away for years. Daniel hung his childhood creations with mock embarrassment and genuine emotion. On Christmas Eve, they sat together on the couch, watching the lights twinkle on the tree. Martha reached for Daniel's hand, marveling again at his presence. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and this will all have been a dream," she admitted. Daniel squeezed her hand. "I'm not going anywhere, Mom. I promise." "I know it won't all be easy," Martha said. "We have years to catch up on. You'll want your own place eventually, your own life." "Yes," Daniel agreed, "but not separate from yours anymore." "Never again," Martha smiled, feeling a peace she hadn't known in a decade. "When I helped that man outside Henderson's bakery, I never imagined I was actually helping my own son find his way back to me." "I think maybe you did imagine it, somewhere deep down," Daniel suggested. "You saw something in Jack's eyes, something familiar." "A mother knows her child," Martha said simply, "even when he's in disguise." Outside, snow began to fall, coating Millfield in a blanket of white that transformed the ordinary into something magical. Martha and Daniel watched it together, their reflection in the window showing what looked like a normal mother and son on Christmas Eve, as if the decade of separation had been nothing but a brief interruption, a paragraph in their story rather than entire missing chapters. In that moment, Martha understood that while time had been lost, love had remained constant, flowing like an underground river, invisible but sustaining, waiting for the moment it could emerge again into the light. A lonely widow had helped a beggar, unaware he was her long-lost son in disguise. But perhaps, Martha thought as she watched the snow fall with Daniel beside her, perhaps some part of her heart had known all along. And that knowing, that love that recognized love even in disguise, had been the true miracle that brought her son home.